Here's another brief anecdote, really, that I've largely covered in the Suidlanders Week in Review of Friday the 25th of November, but which I'm going to cover again now, although this video may only be posted in a couple of days' time. A day or two ago, Wynand du Toit posted excuse me. Wynand du Toit posted on one of my groups, or one of our groups, WhatsApp groups, one that I run, the breaking news that the Supreme Court of Appeal had granted Janusz Walusz, what's the right word? Is it? I don't want to say bail. It's clemency. That he may be set free now. I think that is the right word. In any case, that he may be set free now. And the way he put it, in fact, actually, I think I posted the first thing and then he posted something else. That's right. One of Jacob Zuma's daughters saying that they should clean their guns. Mob justice should take care of Janusz Walusz. And I responded by saying, after I sort of contemplated it for a while, that it may be, from their point of view, a good thing, a natural thing, not morally good, but they're protecting their interests. I'm just looking for this thing that there we go. So this is from the 22nd of November, that would be 24th, Tuesday at 2:50 p.m. is the Citizen reports this: a day for gun cleaning, Zuma's daughter calls for Walusz to be taken out. Duduzile's Zuma Sambula called for mob justice to take place when Janusz Walusz is released from prison. And I said, this is how I replied. Now, obviously, most people are highly indignant, and rightly so, about that, but I kind of saw it in a different way. I said, from the Zuma point of view, she is not wrong. This is my opinion. It sounds like I'm stating it as categorical fact. That's not how I meant it. In my opinion, from the Zuma point of view, she is not wrong, given that they are looking after their interests and their interests alone. Her father, who was then head of ANC intelligence, Jacob Zuma, head of ANC intelligence, must be shaking in his boots from fear over the prospect of a good journalist getting hold of Walusz and extracting the secret of what really happened, or rather, why it really happened and who was really behind it. I'm not suggesting that I, Simon Roche, of all people, know the full, true, inside story, as if I'm, you know what I mean, as if I was there, as if I think I know everything. But I am saying that the conspiracy theory, which I didn't elaborate, makes a whole lot more sense than the mainstream narrative, which has more holes in it than a net draped over a little wooden rowboat on the beach at Paternoster. I hope that Jacques Pau already has a deal with Walusz. The story shall rip the African National Congress right down the middle. What a glorious day. So let me tell you what is the conspiracy theory, what is the story to which I'm referring. And this comes from two people. I'm not terribly well connected. I'd love to say that I was. I'd like, I'd brag about it. But I'm not. However, I can look you in the eyes and say I once dated a girl whose father was arguably South Africa's most famous ambassador from those days. I have a very good friend who, is by no means a contributor to the story, trust me. He didn't like me enough to give me the time of day. I have a very good friend whose father was the head of a state-owned enterprise. They weren't called state-owned enterprises then, and even if they were, it is or was possibly 1,000th or 1/10,000th, literally the size of Eskom. So I'm not, I don't want to exaggerate this, but the fact remains that her dad was the head for years of this state-owned enterprise. And I know other people who were just a few, just a handful. No ministers, no cabinet ministers. I do know the ex-wife of a former president. Not very well, but I have held long conversations with her, sensitive conversations. So here and there you pick things up. Anyway, somewhere, one day, somebody told me something. In talking about the past, in talking about apartheid, the transition, the ANC, what's going on in the country, and people let words slip. They might just change their facial expression for 100th of a second while saying a particular word. Then you know that that word has some significance to them. So they passed some remark, and I scratched a little bit, and so it went on until this person said to me that allegedly at the ANC conference of 1989, I believe, quite possibly in December, and quite possibly in Lusaka in Zambia. I could be wrong about those two things, but in, I believe, 1989. Chris Hani, as the head of Umkhonto weSizwe, gave a speech in which he more or less flipped the bird, gave the middle finger, if I may put it that way, without resorting to crudeness, to the tone and the spirit of the conference as inspired by the most senior leaders of the ANC. So after a few days of conference, he had become irritated by the spirit of reconciliation, the spirit of negotiation, the spirit of how it's all going to be lovely in the new South Africa, and we can't wait. Negotiations have already begun. This is the direction in which we're looking. We're not going to take any nonsense from the Afrikaners, but we're talking nicely, and so on. And he said, let me tell you, nicely, that over my dead body, these were the words that I was told that he specifically used, over my dead body, will there be, how was it put to me? Will there not be a bloody revolution in South Africa? Or words very, very close to that. Meaning, you guys are starting to talk as if you're not communists. You're beginning to speak as if there is not a national democratic revolution to which we have committed and recommitted and recommitted and recommitted ourselves. There shall be a Leninist-style, Russia-sought revolution in South Africa. I will ensure that. I, Chris Hani, head of Umkhonto weSizwe. And allegedly, between these two people, one of them, by the way, so I heard the story from two people, but it overlaps a bit, but you know what I mean. I heard 60% from one person, 60% from the other, and 20% overlaps, and then there are two 40s that are independent. Two parts of 40% each, one on each side. And apparently, allegedly, that spirit of bellicose, wanting war, wanting to go to war, prevailed within him and Mkhonto we Sizwe and perhaps some other segments of the ANC, even up to the point that he was already in South Africa. If I remember correctly, he was assassinated in, I want to say, Benoni of Chris Hani. Boksburg, right? And that was just a year before the multiracial elections. And it was at a time when Boere Crisis Aksie and others were posing an enormous threat. And allegedly, I don't know, but this is the most convincing version of events that I've heard, or the most convincing for me. Both the ANC and the National Party realized that he was not in their best interests. It was described to me in detail how, at that time, the African National Congress was very heavily dominated by the exiles and the Robben Islanders, who were elderly men who'd spent years in jail or years in exile. And those men were very anxious to get to South Africa and to see the promised land. Well, of course, the jail guys and the exile guys by 1993, were back for the most part, but they wanted to see the promised land and they wanted to reap the benefits of it. And given that they were old, what this person said to me was, so-and-so has high blood pressure, so-and-so had severe diabetes, so-and-so, they gave me a description of the illnesses prevalent in South African government now, as a reference to implicitly saying, can you imagine what those other old fogies that were coming into South Africa from exile, can you imagine how ill they were? They knew they didn't have long to go, and they wanted to lay their hands on as much as possible, as rapidly as possible. By contrast, the National Party could play for time. The National Party was under huge pressure. South African inflation was at one point running at 27% a year. There were universal sanctions. A certain portion of the South African white population just wanted to play international sport again. But the National Party was in a position, because it had the reins of power, to speed things up, use the reins to lash the horses of the carriage on the back, or use the reins to break them. This is very normal. It's always the case when a party is holding on to power and it's in negotiations, even if that power is slipping. Okay. And so the African National Congress was eager to make concessions, or not eager, willing. The senior leaders of the African National Congress were willing to make some concessions that the ideologues, the purest socialists, the purest Leninists, the purest Marxists, the purest whatever, the Bolshevists, were not willing to make, or would rather not make, or made reluctantly, or made pretend reluctantly. Chris Hani refused point blank. And he made it clear that he was going to get his way one way or the other, sooner or later. The fact that he had a house in Dawn Park, Boksburg, now he's living like a middle class human being, a Westerner. And apparently the threat was brewing. It was brewing and growing rather than diminishing. So the ANC realized this guy's going to mess up everything for us. We're being handed a country and billions upon billions upon billions of dollars on a platter. We're going to be able to plunder to our heart's contents as they have done. What do we want to go to war for now? They're going to give us everything. They're going to give us the police force, the military, the army, the navy, the air force. We're going to have control of everything. We have nothing to be afraid of. Why should we want to delay the process of laying our hands on the riches by getting involved in a civil war? And it could drag on for years. And it was well understood. This I can tell you is a disputed thing. But I've never heard the counter argument made as well as the pro argument. It was well understood at the levels of people who know what they're doing, not just talk too much, talking too much. People, clever people, that South Africa could have, as in the state, could have prosecuted a civil war for 10 years. It would have lost, and there would have been nothing left. But it could have, if it had wished to do so, done that. So the strategic analysis by the Russians and the East German advisors was, if this ends up in a civil war, the Boere are they're going to be able to hang in there for about 10 years. They'll lose in the end. Between sanctions, foreign forces, the huge black population, and everything else, we reckon we'll win. The forces of Bolshevism will win. But we're not going to win overnight. And that was a dreadful prospect to the old Okies of the ANC. Many of them very ill, and many of them very aged. And all of them dead keen to lay their hands on the loot. Now, on the other side, the apartheid regime, the state of South Africa, the apartheid state, the Christian nationalist state, also didn't want to go to war, because a negotiated peace was far more preferable. Now, you can say what you like about multiracial democracy, the African National Congress, farm murders, the decline of the economy, the appalling state of South African schools, the hopeless inability of the African National Congress to do good things, the decline of South Africa, the trajectory of South Africa, and I would agree with you. Why do you think I work for Sakelanders? Come on, man. I'm not a lefty. But the simple reality is, whether we like it or not, is that we've had, going on for 30 years, of relative peace. Whereas an internal, full-scale civil war, no holds barred, would have led to far greater destruction of the Republic. And when you say this to right-wingers, they get extremely defensive. When you say it to blacks, left-wingers, they get just as defensive. I said it once to a guy whom I know very, very well. Super guy. One of the... I don't know if nicest is the right word. But very, I don't know, I have a high regard for him. Very successful, wealthy, black man, my age roughly. perhaps a year or two younger, who grew up in exile and whose father was an assassin in, I think, the 70s or the 80s. Maybe the 60s and 70s or the 70s and 80s. Anyway, he eventually fled into exile. And he was, by all accounts, I met him once, but I didn't see any evidence of the stories that I was told about him. Apparently he was a maniac. Absolute maniac. Anyway, I told this story to this guy. Not this complete story, not the Janusz Walusz, but this thing of the Civil War. And this guy became so defensive at the idea that the apartheid state could have held out for another 10 years. As far as he was concerned, it was anathema. It was practically, I don't know, heresy. Heresy. We were winning. You're lucky you held on for as long as you did. You racist. I said, okay. I'm just telling you what some very clever people, including ANC people, including your people, believe. That if no quarter was given and the kid gloves were taken off and we resorted to a full-scale civil war, that the apartheid state could have held out for another 10 years. Oh, he was ever so offended by the suggestion that we weren't already knocked out cold. Anyway, just as a right-wing is offended by the opposite implication. Oh dear. But one way or the other, I was told that the ANC and the apartheid government said, all right, we've got to take this Chris Hani out. He's a fly in the ointment. He's a thorn in the flesh. He's going to ruin everything for everybody. So they debated who would do it. And the ANC said, listen, there is no way that we're taking him out, because if it gets traced back to us, we will lose all credibility. If our members discover that we killed Hani, there's no way, we will not touch it with a barge pole. And the apartheid state said, well, if we take him out, we're going to be really at risk of an insurrection by Mkhonto weSizwe. Mkhonto weSizwe, your people, are going to say, now, for sure there must be a revolution. Chris Hani, our leader, was right all along. There's only one way to resolve this matter. And they eventually settled on a setup whereby whereby they, and I don't want to say who they was because I don't know, by no stretch, I've got no idea whatsoever, but that somebody, maybe they were foreign actors, I don't know, maybe they were South African intelligence agency, but I don't know, but that they would set up an event that was supposedly the entire doing of Clive Derby-Lewis and Janusz Walusz, with one or two others in the background, like Clive Derby-Lewis's wife, but that those two would be independent actors, representing maybe like a right-wing, crazy right-wingers. Perhaps there was some nebulous support behind them, but largely independent. And they conspired to ensure that the thing would be suppressed immediately. So when it happened in April of 1993, immediately the ANC and the National Party, independently but complementing one another, said to their respective constituencies, hey guys, please, look, let us just handle, and so you have, for instance, the Nelson Mandela speech at that time, where he tells everybody to calm down, please. And it appears, well, people did listen to it. Now, this has a great deal of similarity to the story of the dancing Israelis and Al-Qaeda in the destruction of the Twin Towers. And I'm sure that we'll get to talk about that sometime. But that's the story of Janusz, Walusz, as it was told to me separately and in two parts, only a portion of each of which overlapped by two different people from completely polar opposite, the ends of the spectrum, years apart, but both of them well informed people who I think knew then and know now what they were talking about. That's it. I hope you appreciated the story. Take very good care of yourselves, and God bless you, everybody. Bye-bye.